Welcome to the lectures on service management principles. I am Grönroos from Hanken School of Economics. The topic is service profitability. Now, an important starting point is that quality doesn't cost. It is lack of quality that costs. It's something that was observed decades ago, but still there seems to be a feeling that perhaps improving quality will cost too much. Improving the wrong way and too much will cost, yes, but not improving quality. There are benefits from high quality that we need to really think about. Benefits for the supplier, service provider, and benefits for the customer. If you first look at the supplier, service provider side, first of all, high quality makes it possible to raise prices above the market price. There's opportunities to do that. It cannot be realized all the time, but the possibility is always there. Secondly, operating costs will decrease. A firm that provides its customers with high quality normally does it in one process, doesn't have to do things over again, doesn't have to take care of complaints, doesn't have to do service recovery, and so on and so forth. Frankly, it costs less. For the customer, well, there's the decreasing costs of maintaining the relationship with a supplier that consistently provides high quality service. Everything works smoother. The customer doesn't have to do unnecessary actions, doesn't have to complain, doesn't have to fight for complaints, doesn't have to ask unnecessary questions, and so on and so forth. It costs less. And secondly, a high quality supplier probably doesn't have to be replaced that easily as another supplier, which means that unnecessary search and startup costs of finding new suppliers and service providers can be avoided. So good quality pays off, and it pays off doubly for both parties. Now, looking closer then to this, you must realize that there are two types of costs, two types of sacrifice, which can be translated into cost. Price is the short-term cost. But then there's a long-term cost, and that is what's called relationship costs. Sometimes it's also called life cycle costs, which is almost the same thing. Relationship costs is something different than price. And the important issue here is to keep in mind that both are important. Both relationship costs and price, when we try to analyze the profitability of a relationship. Now, relationship costs are additional sacrificed on top of price, and they are mostly measurable costs. Not always, but mostly. Especially in business-to-business relationships. Less so in business-to-consumer relationships. And relationship costs that are caused for a customer frequently also leads to similar types of relationship costs for the supplier and service provider. Meaning that if we service the customer in a way that leads to problems, it will start to cost for the customer. We as a supplier will probably also have to do additional things that will start to cost unnecessarily for us as well as supplier. Now, these relationship costs can be divided into three categories: direct, indirect, and psychological. Direct relational costs are investments and out-of-pocket costs required by a relationship. Traditionally, the most well-known direct relationship cost relates to just-in-time logistics. By developing just-in-time logistics, you could decrease the costs of buying, keeping in stock, and using. Which means that the cost occurring for a customer went down. Now, there are always direct relationship costs. In all relationship, customers are required to do something, and we must make sure that we minimize the requirements on the customer. Indirect relationship costs are unexpected, unwanted costs occurring due to quality problems, quality mistakes, service failures. We are delivering the wrong thing, or the maintenance work doesn't succeed in the first time, or the invoice is wrong, or there's mistakes in the invoice. And that leads to complaints or questions from the customer side. That starts to cost for the customer. These must be eliminated. Psychological costs, that's headache. Well, it's a feeling of lack of control, which may lead to headache. That's not measurable in the same way. But if there are indirect relationship costs, there are also psychological costs. So these are measured as indirect relationship costs. Psychological costs should be avoided. Because if these costs start to occur for the customer start to feel problems with the relationships. And we will have problems to keep the customer in the end. This is illustrated to the right on the slide. If the staple in the middle is total costs for the customer, we can just see that the lower part is caused by the net price paid by the customer, paid when purchase takes place, or perhaps slowly, gradually, depending on situation. But then when the relationship continues between the two parties, total relationship costs may start to develop. And they can be a large part of the total costs. Now, what the manager has to look for in a service providing firm is to create high quality ways of supporting the customer so that relationship costs are kept as low as possible. In the lower part of the slide, you can see the comparison between price and relationship costs. The two black staples there, one is one offering, two is another offering. Now offering two has a lower price, and very often customers go for that and buy. However, lower price very often lead to higher total costs over time. So we can see here from the figure that although you pay more for offering one, price is higher, in the end the total costs will be lower than the total costs of offering two. There was a price advantage offering two in the purchasing and negotiation situation. However, that has turned into a total cost advantage offering one in the longer term. Now this is how relationship costs influences the profitability of a relationship. What can we learn from this? Well, for the customer, making purchasing decision based on price alone is dangerous. Lower price easily results in higher long-term costs. And always when making buying situation, always when negotiating with a supplier or service provider, take relationship costs occurring over time into account. Learnings for the supplier and service provider, well, avoid causing relationship costs for the customers. And customer perceived relationship costs almost always lead to unexpected additional costs for the supplier as well. So there are supplier relationship costs as well, and they are tied together. And an initially calculated profit may easily shrink or become a loss. So relationship costs are important to keep in mind if you want to manage the profitability of your customers. And if you as a customer want to manage the profitability of your supplier relationships, take into account relationship costs. Now, the profit of a relationship It's not an easy thing. We could say that the better service quality, the better perceived quality, the better profit in the end. But there's so many variables and factors that can influence this. So let me finally go through this. This is a model developed by Kai Storbacka, Tore Strandvik, and myself. Perceived service quality. And in the end, this should translate into a good customer relationship profit. And this is looking at it from the supplier, from the service provider side. Now, depending on the sacrifice that the customer has, perceived service quality translates to a perceived value in use. Quality is nice and fine, but if it costs too much, value is low. But then, the next phase is that the perceived value, yes, that makes the customer satisfied more or less. And that creates a commitment. If customers are very satisfied, they will be more committed to the supplier than otherwise. It also creates bonds to the supplier, emotional bonds, technological bonds, other types of bonds that keeps the customer in the relationship. And this has a positive influence on relationship strength. However, if the customer realizes that there are many alternatives, that will have a negative effect on the potential length of the relationship. If the customer, on the other hand, because of satisfaction with the supplier, will disregard most of the alternatives, but everything seems to function well, this will have a positive effect on the relationship length. And if the customer perceives the relationship to be strong, that will lead to less critical episodes in the relationship. But however, if the supplier causes negative episodes too much, that will have a negative influence again on relationship length. So as one can see here, there's a lot of managerial challenges on the way. Finally, how does relationship length translate into profit in the relationship? Well, the length of the relationship means probably a better cash flow. And if the strength is really high, we can really get the heart and mind of the customer. We will not only get a larger share of the customer wallet, we will get the customer's heart and mind as well. And we may get even more of the customer's wallet, which has a positive effect on revenues. And the episode configuration, that is, in which way are we taking care of the relationship? How are we supplying the customer? Has an effect on the cost level. And then, again, this adds up in the relationship profit for the supplier or service provider. Now, this model, as a managerial tool, shows how large a spectrum of context, issues, challenges, opportunities, and problems that exist when one wants to manage the profit of a customer relationship. Next lecture will be about reciprocal return on relationships. Thank you.